Hello, is this Miss Wade on the phone?
Holly, I am on the phone, but I can barely hear you.
Okay, well, that's I don't know how I can't deal, but we'll try. I'll try to speak a little closer into the phone, but that's an engineering issue. Good morning. This is Nezzy Wade. Ooh, that sounded different.
Yes, this is better. Right. I can hear you much better.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm being joined by Nezzy Wade, and she's going to share a little bit of information with us about what's going on and I guess striving towards a shelter crisis declaration in Humboldt County, and it feels like it's been a long journey. And if I feel that way, it must feel like I mean, I'm just mostly watching. So imagine that it feels like it's been a bit of a long journey for all y'all that are doing the work. So there was some change in news over the last few weeks. So I wanted to give people an update about that. So why don't you go ahead and let us know what's going on.
Thank you for having me on the show, Holly, and inviting more information. I've tried to get as much information as I can. The last Board of Supervisors meeting, I was not present. I was out of town due to a death in my family, but I was very connected remotely and have come back and looked at all of the transcripts and looked at the videos of the program and have talked to a couple of supervisors. And the board passed a motion to establish an ad hoc committee with Estelle Fennell and Rex Bone on the committee to meet with and to add members to that committee who could inform their decision as to whether or not to declare a shelter crisis and appoint a task force related to the shelter crisis declaration.
So we're going through a little bit of government process around it.
Yes, we are.
And the ad hoc committee is going to decide if they're going to declare a crisis. What happens if they do?
The ad hoc committee is not to decide. The ad hoc committee's job is to take in information and inform the decision of the Board of Supervisors regarding whether to declare a shelter crisis and appoint a task force or not. And so that was kind of confusing, but that is the charge. And when I spoke with Supervisor Bone last Thursday, I asked if it would be possible to meet with that committee to help inform the decision that they would be, making about whether to recommend or not recommend. And he said there had not been a committee established yet. And I said, well, we have until the 6th of February in order to have the information that you need to inform a decision. So when is that going to happen? And he said that the committee, the second time I talked to him, which was on Monday last, that the committee is being made up of he and Supervisor Fennell, the director of DHHS, Connie Beck, and the CAO. So those are the four people that are supposedly, as far as I know, on the ad hoc committee, which, if they're the only ones informing the decision, I can see, when I asked about getting information, he said, well, you can take it and drop it off at the county clerk's office if you want to share something, if there's something you want them to know. So that's one way of getting information to them, whether or not it gets there or how it gets distributed is not really known. I was really hoping there would be an opportunity for a committee meeting held publicly that people may be able to listen to their discussion and add more information, because I have prepared a document that has a lot of information on the benefits of declaring a shelter crisis with some other information about other federal acts, or the Public Health Services Act, for example, and the Stafford Act, which allows for other declarations, just to help inform what might be possible. But it doesn't appear that that's going to be the case. So
let's talk about some of those pros that you would like to share, because this is also a great opportunity, and then people can hear that information and perhaps pass it on themselves as well, kind of echo that out. It's just great information to talk about.
When I talked to Supervisor Bone the last time, he said that they didn't think they were going to declare a shelter crisis. that they would maybe appoint a task force. And I guess it's up to the full board to make that decision. But I was concerned about one or the other. Part of the reason of asking in the petition that was submitted for the declaration of a shelter crisis as well as the formation of a task force is that the declaration of a shelter crisis can facilitate the work that a task force can do. And that's...
Well, let's talk about some of what that might be. What is that work? Why are you why are you a proponent of this?
It would allow elected bodies to relax zoning and not incur liability, because a declaration operates kind of like a policy tool. And so when you do that, you allow the suspension of statutes and regulations for the purpose of facilitating contracting with various entities, including private providers of homeless services. They were asking for examples of where this has happened in other cities or counties of the size of Humboldt. And we have an example right here in our own backyard. The whole idea of declaring a shelter crisis is that nothing delays the mitigation of the situation of homelessness. And we saw when they wanted to create an alternative to get people safe, Betty Chin's container village was established, and that has been something that's been ongoing. That's the kind of thing that can happen immediately if
it allows
a shelter crisis
for a faster solution opportunities, because you don't have to follow the normal...
Right,
or
exactly.
I guess I don't want to say normal, but the traditional, the kind of codified zoning and building regulations.
And so alternatives become possible that otherwise wouldn't be. Spaces are opened up that otherwise wouldn't be. And so it increases the capabilities we have tremendously in addressing that. And I guess one of the greatest overall benefits, if the board makes a determination to declare a shelter crisis, is that it highlights the local approach in confronting homelessness, and it raises public awareness, and it clarifies that the county is impacted and has a severe shortage of housing, affordable housing, emergency housing, and it allows people who now exist outside with no protections safety and that they can be near services. And so it really generates a sense of urgency and creates a public and political will to move quickly within the jurisdiction.
Nancy, does it do that permanently, or does it have a time frame? What I'm thinking about is those shelters that were created with the initiative that up in Eureka with their shelter declaration, and they were temporary. And right. I'm wondering if there's the ability to also create permanent structures with a shelter declaration.
That is the idea in the larger picture of things. The state recently has set precedents by passing a shelter crisis declaration for large counties and cities in California with the intention of getting people safe. But the other intention is to facilitate in the longer-term picture the creation of available housing and affordable housing. And so that's what it does. But that's partly what the creation of the task force does. It creates the entities needed immediately, but it facilitates the longer-term perspective of how we can do this in a way that benefits the county and not unequally, but more well-distributed. So,
Lizzie, we're going to need to take a little bit of a break, and when we come back, I'd like to hear what would be the ideal next steps if the crisis gets declared. Okay, wonderful.
Thanks very much.
Hold on for a second.
All right. Thank you very much, Holly. Just a brief, you're listening to Monday Morning Magazine here on KMUD. Coming up at 9 a.m. on KMUD, we have Alternative Radio. And this week on Alternative Radio, Cara Drainen will be David Barsamian's guest, talking about the justice system's war on kids. That's coming up at 9 a.m. on KMUD. But until then, we have another hour and a half of Monday Morning Magazine with your host, Holly Carter, and we will get back to that right now.
Break. That was a super quick break. Thank you for that, John Harden. And this is Holly Carter, and I'm joined on air at this moment by Nezzie Wade, and we're talking about the progress and potential of what could happen if Humboldt County declares a shelter crisis. And so we left off with, maybe let's talk a little bit about what your next steps, and maybe the people that you work with who are, I guess I don't want to say in the trenches, that sounds nasty, but down doing the work. What would be the ideal next steps if this crisis gets declared?
If the crisis gets declared, I think forming a task force, and the ideal case would be that would happen simultaneously. Mm-hmm. And the task force would immediately try to locate spaces that would be available for people to be in each community that would allow them, safety and keep them safe, warm, and dry. And then that would then help get them connected to services, and it would impel the municipalities in the county to also, look into what they can do locally with their own resources and to work together. The whole idea is that it's a coordinated effort. If the county declares a shelter crisis, then cities, counties, the state, if necessary, work together to create what's needed to support the endeavor. So, if they identify and establish potential sites, then county staff can work with community members to identify sites, because people in community are probably most familiar with what might be available or where people are located now. And the idea is to save some of the destruction that's happened in the way that we've treated the homeless population. We've moved them out of places, and some of the greatest devastation to them has been disrupting their communities, their families, their relationships, and making it extremely difficult for them to survive. And I know that some of the philosophy around here is that that's okay, but it's fundamentally morally inappropriate and damaging all the way around. So taking people intact communities where they are and giving them an opportunity to move to a point of safety is very, very important. Because once you disrupt people, you can't get to them. You can't connect them to resources or services or anything that helps them, reclaim participation in community.
Where do you see those spaces existing for potential at this time? I mean, I think we look around. It's hard for people to see it if they don't.
Well, every community has in their housing element. Every municipality and the county have in their housing elements what are called SB2 zones. They're already pre-designated, identified areas where emergency shelters can take place.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And some of those could possibly be utilized. The county, the cities, that's different. But the county, we're talking about not within cities. The county declaring a shelter crisis is independent of anything else. But in the county, we have these areas. If it were to be declared in a city, the city could also identify what they could utilize within their borders, because the way that it works is, according to the Shelter Crisis Declaration, is that public space is anything that's owned, operated, leased, maintained, controlled by the political subdivision can be utilized.
So anything that's owned by the county itself?
Contract even with a private property owner, okay, and have a lease, they could do that as long as they controlled it. It could be used in that instance.
So that would be things that were owned by the county itself, or things that the county wanted to enter into a lease.
Or county controlled properties. That's basically what it would be. Okay. And they could, it doesn't mean that there's no control. They certainly do have control. I think there's been some mention of, so it could result in chaos. That would not be the case. It would be something that would be deliberate, and it would be to take the situation in hand and get the things that people need, like health care and services, and to reduce the impact of ordinances and laws on criminalizing and that sort of thing, like creating an opportunity for a different situation. So if we had a task force, for example, through the duration, you asked about how long does this last, you could set a time limit on it for as long as you want. You could leave it open-ended. I think Eureka's has been somewhat open-ended in the sense that they've had to make changes to accommodate what they want to do based on that. But the state, for example, has said until January of 2022, these cities have a shelter crisis until such time as they are able to create alternatives or impact the problem. And so there's a task force could identify key projects and actions that would need to take place, and it would work to prioritize the needs and to implement the recommendations of the task force.
So the creation of the task force can happen at the same time as the declaration, which is what the goal of, or what you would ask of an ad hoc committee.
Yeah, you can do a lot. You can do a lot with the task force. You certainly can. The one thing that you can't do, though, is you'll be trying to deal with the same context. A task force under the declaration of the shelter crisis would really facilitate getting things accomplished. And so it could also be used in applying for different kinds of funding and to foundations and to private lenders, to other public entities that would like to contribute to supporting or addressing housing, our unsheltered. And I don't know how much time we have left, but what I would really like to emphasize is there's a lot that has not been discussed. It's just not a matter of whether we can or can't. We've heard comments from supervisors like Supervisor Vass has said, well, there's legalities. We might check. There are legalities we might get into or something. We don't know what the concerns are specifically about those legalities because they haven't been articulated.
Yeah, so, I mean that's something that comes up with everything.
Right, right. But there's many things that could be sorted and that could give them confidence to know that, this would remove barriers that might otherwise bar a project or a practice by looking at it under the lens of a shelter crisis. Mm-hmm. And the declaration gives a really clear direction to all the decision makers about what projects and programs to support. And if you do that, then everyone is moving in the same direction. So, while you can have things that allow permits and approvals to be, it could possibly entirely waived or modified as needed as long as there's no gross negligence in areas pertaining to health, safety, and, shelter and housing. So there's a lot of discussion that could come from all of that, that should come before all of that, to give them some confidence about declaring a shelter crisis. But it also impels the surrounding entities in terms of the cities and municipalities to begin to look at how what they're doing is impacting homelessness as well. So in the long term, we're looking at, having something that people can access in the areas where they live, not so that they don't have to come to some other place for services, so that they can be more likely to reconnect with their families, so they can be more likely to become part of the community. And where, of course, our interest is in developing, legal camping and then tiny house villages, which would give people an opportunity or a transitional period to be a temporary period to be available to services and support and reconnect with the people they need to in order to move on. And from the point of view of people that are homeless, based on other communities that have done these kinds of projects, folks are often oppressed and criminalized and by an unresponsive system, mm-hmm. and sometimes a too responsive system when it gets to law enforcement. So there are lots of organizations, individuals, government entities that could be working hard at at dealing with this problem in a very different way rather than the continue the traditional approach, which is very costly and has had some impact. And we need every bit of everything that's happening, but this would provide something that would be different and has worked in other areas. And thankfully, it's finally on the agenda to be considered. It should definitely be considered more in depth and as broadly as possible in order for a decision to be made, because it has great import for us in the future.
So let's give some information about how we can engage in that. You and I were chatting just a little bit, like, well, I care about this, and maybe I did miss the planning or the Board of Supervisors meeting where they discussed it, and now it sounds like it's going into an ad hoc. How could people suggest or encourage that the crisis gets declared? And then one of the other things that I'd like to ask is, if you said that you have a lengthy report you'd like to share, and I wondered if other people would be able to access that to get some background.
One of the things so the calendar, looking at the calendar, my understanding is that they're on their next meeting on their February 6th meeting is going to be where they discuss this. AHA is having a meeting Saturday the 3rd at the Labor Temple. It's our General Assembly from 11:30 to 2. And we can take a chunk of that time to talk about, the benefits of a shelter crisis declaration and maybe ways that people can give input. It's very close to the date of the decision. And I have to tell you, quite honestly, when I spoke with my supervisor for my district, who is on the ad hoc committee, I got the very distinct impression, because it was told, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this. And I think that it's almost where the decision is already made, that it's perfunctory in some respects. So that's what I would not hope for. And I would encourage people to go to that meeting and to ask the supervisors, aside from whatever recommendations they're receiving, and to direct them to adopt a shelter crisis, and ask them to spend or to allay it, to put it off, and get more information about what it could actually do, and how they could go about it. And I think they would be okay with forming a task force, and that's great. I think forming a task force is great, but something needs to impel them to move forward. Mm-hmm. And so strict timelines being involved, the things that we could talk about the things that might really be necessary to get results.
Let's do that on a follow-up call, because we're almost out of time for this segment. And we do have Ms. Fennell coming in next for the Between the Hum segment. You have some contact information for contacting you. What you said, you guys were having a meeting for AHA?
Yeah, AHA, we meet at the Central Labor Council at 840 E Street in the main room. And our meeting time, we have 11:30 to 12. We just usually have snacks and chat. And then from 12 to 2, we have our regular meeting. And everyone is welcome to come to that. It's open to the public. We usually have a speaker or some kind of topic or some kind of training or something that we share that everyone is welcome to attend. This time, because it's prior to the Board of Supervisors meeting where they're going to be making this decision, there will be opportunity for public comment, and we will probably talk about some of this during that meeting. In fact, probably a large chunk of that meeting will be about this. So if you're interested and you want to learn more, come to that meeting or call AHA at 707-267-4035.
All right. Thank you for that. And then, as always, if you want to make comment on anything on the Board of Supervisors or a side note Planning Commission, you can email I believe it's planning clerk at co.humboldt.ca.gov.
Yeah, the clerk of the board.
I can look that up and give that out again here just in a minute. the clerk of the board is a place to submit written comments, but you have to do it before the meeting if you want it as part of the record. Or to be considered in the decision. It's a little easier to decide based on information you have than not input.
Yeah.
So thank you for all the work that you're doing, and it sounds like we're getting close to, it sounds like we've got our next guest on the line. So thank you for joining us this morning, Miss Wade, and we'll look forward to hearing more.
Thank you very much, Holly. Appreciate the time and the interest in helping spread the word in the community about the possibilities.
Yeah, you got it. And actually, before we get off of this topic, one of the things that strikes me, just something to share, is there was a woman that came on Monday Morning Magazine maybe a year and a half ago. And the one thing that I asked, if there was one change that could be made in the next year, her ask was for access to water. And I just want to note that has not happened, at least in our community.
Oh, we've limited the access to many things: water, electricity, and ability to charge phones and get connected to the community.
Yeah,
it's really dire.
It
is really dire, and people are dying. And our morality should really be challenged in that we allow this to happen. Yeah.
Well, thank you again. All right,
you're welcome.
We're going to take a quick transition and be joined if we're ready already. All right. I like how smooth this is going this morning. This is feeling great. So this is, again, Holly Carter, Monday Morning Magazine, and I believe we're joined by Estelle Fennell. Are you there?
Good morning, Holly.
Good morning. All right. Supervisor Fennell here to talk with us about what's going on up at the county. Give us our Between the Hums report. Do you want to take it away?
So let's see. So we don't have a meeting this week.
Okay.
So it's the 6th Tuesday, or the 5th Tuesday, so we don't usually have a meeting on a 5th Tuesday. However, obviously there's a lot going on that we're working on. You just were talking about the homeless crisis, and so myself and Supervisor Bone are part of an ad hoc committee that's looking at bringing back recommendations to the Board of Supervisors next week, which is February 6th, the first meeting in February. So we'll be looking at that. We've already had some meetings, and we'll continue. The bottom line that we have to look at, pursuant to the conversation we had at our last meeting discussing this issue, was whether or not it makes sense or would be helpful to declare a shelter crisis, and also to look at creating a task force to address finding solutions for sheltering the homeless and people who are at that stage in their lives. So bottom line, when we had that discussion that actually created this ad hoc committee, the most important message that came out, I think, from people who've been dealing with it for a long time, is that there is an incredible shortage of housing. And I guess that's nationwide, in certain places more than others, but we certainly have it here in Humboldt County, and especially workforce and low-income housing. And so that'll be one of the issues that will have to be addressed by this task force. We are going to look at what a task force would look like, what the makeup would be, how many people would be on it, how they would be appointed, et cetera, et cetera. So still working on that, and we will come back with a recommendation for the full board to discuss on February 6th. The other thing that I'm working on right now is another ad hoc committee, and this is with regard to cannabis. As you know, was on the ad hoc committee with Supervisor Sundberg throughout much of this process, where we were looking at the ordinance, and that a lot of that is now basically in the works, whether it's with the Planning Commission or the Planning Department. But there's still some issues that need to be looked at, and we have a few of those to deal with, and we'll be coming back with those in April. One of the things we'll be looking at is track and trace. The other is taxation, and there was a third one. I can't remember it now. But the bottom line is we are getting into that transition period where there's a few outstanding items that still have to be addressed. And the reason we put taxation on there is just to come back with a report to clarify the excise tax and how that's implemented. And I know that some people have had questions about that, and we'll hope to be able to clarify some of those when we come back, and that will probably be the first thing that we come back with. Interestingly enough, I was looking at the statistics for cannabis as we're now in 2018, and things have changed dramatically at the state level. The whole cooperative, collective type model for medical marijuana is kind of phased out, and we're into the commercial sales of marijuana. So those who have gone ahead and gotten permits are now the only people legally allowed to sell marijuana. And it's interesting to see the breakdown of how many people have gotten either permits or interim permits. For instance, we know that there were in excess of 2,000 people who initially applied for permits in Humboldt County. Of those, there's 121 approved permits, all the way approved. And then there are 326 people who have come in for interim permits. Those are people who were in the process but weren't all the way approved, but were allowed to go forward for interim permits so that they could be at the cutting edge, basically, so that they could actually sell product that they would have grown in 2017 under the good standing clause. They would be able to do that. So 326 of those, there were actually 600 people who were eligible, but 326 actually went ahead and got those permits. And there's been questions about, what the market is going to look like and who's going to be permitted. And that will also change, I think, in Humboldt County once we get onto the second phase of our ordinance, which is having done the environmental impact report and made some amendments to the original ordinance. The Planning Commission has been looking at that, and they have just signed off on it. So that will be coming to the Board of Supervisors probably at the end of February. At that point, the areas where you can grow or you can get a new permit will expand beyond prime ag, which I think was a big issue for quite a number of people. So that'll be one of the changes that will be made, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that. One of the questions that actually somebody called me up, Kelly Lincoln was doing a story, I think, for the local papers. She was asking, what is the ratio? What is the new market going to look like? Well, that's anybody's guess, obviously. But I did.
Yeah, if you find that out, let us know. If you find out,
yep.
someone tell us.
Well, I don't. I can't. This is not a scientific review. I just took a quick look at the people who have the interim permits, and people are really concerned that the big grows will be the model, and that doesn't really seem to be playing out, depending on what you think of as a big grow. So, there's talk of acres, and of these, 16 of the 376 were an acre, or at least close enough to an acre for me to think of it that way. And there were about 13 that were between a half an acre and an acre. Then there were a substantial number that it seemed 10,000 square feet seemed to be a very popular size, about 85 of those. And there were 76, by my count, between 6,000 square feet and 10,000 square feet, 26 between 5,000 and 6,000, 45 between 2,000 and 5,000, and there were 16 under 2,000. So you can see that the trend is towards that middle size. And now that, again, is just people. That's a very unscientific, so don't be quoting me on that. But it just gives me a general idea that when people were going into the market, they were thinking to be around that medium size. Some of them, obviously, some went to much larger. I didn't look at the mixed size, but a lot of those are smaller because people intend to be able to get 2 harvests a year out of them. But if the people have a mixed light, they pay twice the amount in excise tax. So it would be very interesting to see.
Just to remind folks who maybe aren't up on the language that the mixed light means that they're doing more than one harvest because they either add light or take light away. Light differentiation.
There's quite a few. I look at, I didn't do a count on that, but there are quite a few people who do a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, anybody's guess how this thing is going to find its balance, but it's important to remember that it's the people who are permitted who are now going to be selling. And the anecdotal information I have is that people who had packaged products, as they call it, could just right now go and get pretty much a very good price for their product. The demand is really growing for quote-unquote packaged product. Humboldt County, by the way, statewide, has the largest amount of licenses. So of let's see, I can't remember what the total is. There's 742 state licenses statewide. Of those, 184, which is 25%, are in Humboldt County, and 147, 20%, are in Santa Barbara County. So that's kind of interesting to see how that's panning out as well. And then Mendocino County has 11% with 85 state permits, and then it kind of goes down from there. Calaveras has 48, which translates to about 6%. So it's kind of anybody's guess how it's going to shape out. It has a lot to do with whether or not counties were ready. Some counties started and then stopped, and we'll see how that goes. But it's a big, anybody's guess. I know that people are concerned about a number of issues, but it is a whole brave new world, and the people who would be involved in the cannabis industry may not be involved in growing, or they may not be involved in processing. There's all sorts of roles. It's very important for there to be distributors and manufacturers for people who are cultivating to go to, and for people to make those connections. So those are all things that we're seeing coming out now.
There's going to be a large transition of labor, workforce.
Pardon?
Well, just I've been thinking a lot about how it's going to be a transition for a lot of people, just in terms of what kind of work you can access and what's going to be needed. So that's another story for another time, maybe.
It's really, it's so difficult because this is something that was not regulated to any large degree up until now, and now it's a regulated commercial market, and that's a difficult transition for some, and I'm just hopeful that people will find whatever niche that they want to be involved in, if they are actually thinking of being involved in the commercial market. And just so you know, for people who always said they're just growing a little, you can always grow 6 plants without having any permits or anything like that, just for your own use. That's an important part of the